Okay, good evening. How are you doing? How are you doing is a common question. And when you think about what's the appropriate answer, how am I doing? How am I doing? We generally translate into how am I feeling? But if we would ask it a little bit deeper, how am I doing? How is HaKadosh Baruch Hu viewing me? How do I feel that I'm progressing in my avodas Hashem? How am I doing? There's a fly that's very, very attracted to my jacket this evening. The goal of our brief discussion tonight is going to answer the question, how are we doing? V'Yakov holech l'darko v'yivku bo malachei Elokim. The very end of the Parsha, after so much unfolds, Yaakov's life begins, and so much of the challenges, the nisyonos that he faces, takes place in this Parsha. And then he travels with his family, headed towards Eretz Yisrael. V'yivku bo malachei Elokim, and the angels of Hashem encounter him. V'yomer Yaakov ka'asher ro machane Elokim zeh, v'yikra shem ha'makom hahu machanayim. And he said, wow, I'm encountering this group of angels, and he called the place Machanayim. Machanayim we know is plural, for not one but two camps. Rashi's bothered by two different questions. The first question is, what group of angels are going out to greet Yaakov? Second issue is, why does he call the place Machanayim? Why the plural? So Rashi famously explains, V'yifku bo malachei Elokim, malachim shel Eretz Yisrael bo likroso, lilvoso la'aretz. They were special malachim. They were the angels of Eretz Yisrael, and they were going to greet Yaakov in order to bring him, to accompany him into Eretz Yisrael. Machanayim, why does he name it the plural? Camps. Because, explains Rashi, Shtei machanos, altogether there were two groups. Shel chutz la'aretz shebo imo ad kan. You had the group of malachim from outside of Eretz Yisrael accompanying him until this point. And then, v'shel Eretz Yisrael shebo likroso. Then you had the group of special malachim coming from Eretz Yisrael. Hence, he calls that place Machanayim. The Ramban is bothered by a very basic question. Now, we don't know that much about how malachim work and when do they greet you, at what point along your journey, but the Ramban does. He knows how malachim work generally, and he's bothered by the question, V'ani tomu b'zeh, sharei adayin lo agia Yaakov la'oretz, v'rochok haya misham. I don't get it. Yaakov Avinu was far away from Eretz Yisrael, so why would the special malachim of Eretz Yisrael greet him at this point? Rachok hayim misham, he goes on to prove, based on different psukim, that he was still far away. So the Ramban questions Rashi's understanding. How was it that the angels of Eretz Yisrael would greet Yaakov? He wasn't close to Eretz Yisrael. So I want to share with you an interesting halacha. We know that for Shachris and Mincha, generally when it's not a Shabbos or Yontif or a different Simcha, we say Tachnun. Tachnun, otherwise known as Nefilas Apayim, right? The falling down on one's face. And there's a halacha, we actually discussed this at length at a Sunday morning shiur. There's a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, Ein Nefilas Apayim B'layla. You're not allowed to do Nefilas Apayim. We don't do Tachnun at night. However, Ubeleile Ashmoros, during the days when we say Slichos, wake up early in the morning before Alos HaShachar, so it's still officially night, during that time of year, Noagim Lipol Al Panehem, there, although it's officially Laila, we do say Tachnun. For what reason? Shu Korov Liyom, because it's close to day. So generally speaking, Let's say Mincha does not start for a while, 15 minutes after Shkia, and by the time you're done with Shmona Esrei and Chazaras Hashatz, it's already close to 30 minutes after Shkia. So likely, it's Laila, it's officially nightfall, you would not say Tachnun. The Taz, though, he says many times you might have a shul that starts Mincha 15 minutes before Shkia, and they might run a couple minutes behind. By the time they get to Tachnun, it's past sunset. It's Bein Hashmashos, right? It's not quite day, it's not quite night, but it's not clearly Laila yet. So the Taz writes, generally we don't say Tachnun at night because Tachnun is awakening the Midas Hadin, and therefore at Laila, when the Midas Hadin is in more of its strength, it's inappropriate to have too much of that force. However, says the Taz, during Bein Hashmashos, if it's a little bit past sunset, it's in that twilight zone, so then Nira she'ein lochush lezeh. It appears you don't have to be concerned, and you'd be allowed to say Tachnun during Bein Hashmashos. Because it's not Vaday Laila yet. De lo gora milel ashmuro shehu korav l'yom. He says, I have a proof to this. My proof is what the Mechaber just taught us. That during Slichos, where it's even before dawn, it's officially nightfall, we do say Tachnun, because it's so close to day. The Taz therefore says, that's probably true in the opposite direction as well. If it's just ending the day, but it's still within Bein Hashmashos, you could say Tachnun. That's the ruling of the Taz. What's fascinating is that not everyone agrees, right? Not surprising. The Machzis HaShekel says there could be a difference. It could very well be that the reason why we feel comfortable saying Tachnun during the times of Slichos, when it's officially nightfall, but it's Korav Liyom, it's close to day, is because there it's a whole different midah in the world. It's not midas hadin. It's Korav Liyom, you're getting close to the light, and therefore it's more of a midas harachamim. Even though officially, halachically, it's nighttime, but it's a different energy. In contrast to, says the Machzeh Shekel, potentially, even 1 minute after sunset, even though it's only Bein Hashmashos, it's not Vaday Laila, but it could be now it's Korov Lilaila. It's getting closer to Choshech, getting closer to night. Then there's already a Midas Hadin that's working in the world. It might be inappropriate to say Tachnun at that time. What's incredible about this idea of the Machzeh Shekel is that he's sharing with us, even halachically, there could be a distinction in how we view your present status based on where you're about to be. Even though right here and now, it's officially Laila, I could say Tachnun, because it's getting close to dawn. It's getting close to daybreak. It's only 1 minute past sunset, but potentially you can't say Tachnun. We don't pass in that way. But potentially you can't say Tachnun because now it's getting close to nightfall. So my halachic status in the present can potentially be based on where I'm about to be in the future. Reb Meir Chodosh was the great mashgiach of Slobodka, and he told the following story regarding his Rebbe, Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the great alter of Slobodka. Reb Meir Chodosh said that there was once a time in the yeshiva where there were a lot of new students, and there were two very unique bachrim, Moshe and Yehuda. Moshe was an Ilui. He was brilliant. He came from a background of lumdis, of depth and breadth, and he was incredible. And everyone really stood in awe of Moshe's talents, of his grasp and shas. Yehuda was very sincere, but not nearly as naturally gifted as Moshe. The alter of Slobodka was very deliberate in his interactions with the Talmidim, who he would speak to, how he would interact with them, And over the course of the few weeks that these new students were in the yeshiva, it was clear the Alter of Slobodka was connected a lot more to Yehuda than to Moshe. Moshe felt not only that he wasn't appreciated so much by the great Alter of Slobodka, but he was almost being ignored. Now they do say parenthetically, a lot of the methodology of the Alter of Slobodka is something that you can't really bring into the 21st century so easily. He would give harsh rebuke, he would be very open with his Talmidim. The only reason he was able to rip somebody apart, so to speak, is because he also had the tools to sew them back together, and through this back and forth, through his relationship with the Talmidim, he was able to make real men. Nowadays we have to be a lot softer. However, Moshe, after a few weeks of getting the cold shoulder, so to speak, from his Rebbe, he builds up the courage to go over to the Alter of Slobodka and ask him, point blank, what's going on? I came to yeshiva, I've been trying so hard, I've been excelling in the Shiur, I've been helping so many other Talmidim, people come to me with their questions, people look up to me and they admire me, but yet I feel like Rebbe doesn't really appreciate me. We barely have any conversations, and when I go over to ask a question, the answer is usually short, straightforward, but I see Yehuda, you could schmooze with him for hours and share all of this hashkafa and musar. Is there something I'm doing wrong? So the Alter of Slobodka said as follows. He said, if you look at the terminology of Chazal, the way they refer to the afternoon, this is based on a pasuk in Yirmiyah, but they call the afternoon Silei Erev, really the shadows of the evening. Even though the sun is out and it might be the most gorgeous time of day, but they refer to the afternoon as Silei Erev. The shadows of night are upon us. Yet, said the Alter of Slobodka, we know that halachically speaking, day starts from Alos HaShachar. Alos HaShachar, we generally assume, is 72 minutes before the rising of the sun. So it's pretty much pitch black. At that moment of Alos HaShachar, you have some of those first rays of light coming out of the eastern horizon, but it's still pretty much black. Yet that has the halachic status of day. The reason for this, explained the Alter of Slobodka, is that in the assessment of Chazal, in the perception of the Torah, when you say, how are you? Where am I right now? The answer to that question is generally based on where am I going? Where am I headed? So in the afternoon it might be beautiful outside, but Silei Erev, this is called the shadows of night because it's headed towards evening. Alos HaShachar might be pitch black almost, but that has the halachic status of Yom. You could be Mekayim all the mitzvahs that require Yom because it's headed towards the day. So the Alter said, I'm not sure how he did this without destroying the fellow. I would have been devastated and probably off the derech for the rest of my life. But this is what he said. He said, I see in Yehuda, I see Alos HaShachar. I see that he's so far from a sense of complacency. He's striving. He doesn't have your natural talents. He doesn't have the God-given gifts that you may have. But he's a Ben Aliyah. He's going in that direction. I feel that because Baruch Hashem you have so many kochos and you come in with this experience and with the brilliance, you don't have that same thirst, that same hunger, that same drive. I'm seeing a little bit of the Silei Erev. I think you have potential to be a Alos HaShachar, but there has to be a paradigm shift. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the great founder of the Musar movement, used to quote the pasuk in Hosea, Kinar Yisrael v'ohavehu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that Klal Yisrael I view as a nar. What's the definition of nar? Of a child. Klal Yisrael is a nar, v'ohavehu, and therefore I love them. Explain Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us through the Navi, is what I love about you, Klal Yisrael, is that there's this youth, there's this energy, there's this she'ifa, there are aspirations for growth. I see a los hashachar. It might be still pretty dark outside, but I see the direction you're headed, and therefore, v'ohavehu, I love you because of your nairus, because of that youth. There's an interesting discussion in the Gemara in Brachos. Maybe we'll have a separate conversation on this because there's a lot to get into. The question of how much those who are no longer with us, how or where are they of what takes place in this world? What level of yediyah did they have regarding our conversations, our lives, our struggles? And this is debated by Amoraim. It's not a simple answer as you could probably imagine. At one step in this back and forth in the Gemara says as follows. It's the top of page 3 here. Gemara in Brachos Daf Yud Tes. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak kol mesaper acharei hameis ki mesaper acharei even. Anyone who speaks negatively about someone who's passed away, it's as if he's speaking negatively about a stone. What does that mean? Either because we assume the person who's no longer here is not aware of what that person is saying, ve'ike de'amri, or the interpretation might be, di yoda v'lo ichbis lahu, that no, they're well aware of what exactly is being said, but they don't care anymore. Right? He made fun of me. So what? Then the Gemara has the following question. We have a tradition from Rav Papa that Chadish Toy Milsa Basrei de Mar Shmuel. After the great Amora Shmuel passed away, somebody spoke negatively about Shmuel. V'nofel Kanya Mitalo, and this massive beam fell from the ceiling. Ubaze la'arnika de moche, and it split his skull. The assumption is this was Shmuel's revenge, so to speak. Shmuel heard this person speaking negatively about him, and this was the repercussion. The Gemara says back, that's no clear proof that Shmuel was aware of what was said. Maybe shiny tsurva mirabanin dekudsha brichu tova bikare. When it comes to somebody like Shmuel, he was in the category of a tsurva midirabanin. What does that literally mean? Tsurva midirabanin. He was one of the great young Torah scholars. Rashi and Tainus explains whenever we have that phrase tsurva midirabanin, it means one of the young, upcoming Talmidei Chachamim. And maybe it wasn't Shmuel that was getting this person, so to speak. It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem, who cares about the kavod of the great, young, up-and-coming Talmidei Chachamim. It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's decision, not Shmuel's. What's fascinating, though, about this particular language of the Gemara is why would it refer to Shmuel after he's no longer in this world? He died as an old man, as a tsurva midirabanan, as a young, upcoming Talmid Chacham. But I think it might be the same idea as Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I have so much of a love for those Ovdei Hashem who serve me with a sense of youth, with this desire to keep on growing, where they have a clear direction, and that clear direction defines who they are right now. Referring to Shmuel as a Tzurva D'Rabbanan was the ultimate praise. That was a title of Chashivus. So the Ramban was bothered by the question, why did the angels of Eretz Yisrael come to greet Yaakov when he was so far away from the border of Eretz Yisrael? Answers the Maral, says the Gur Aryeh, I don't understand the Ramban's question. To me, it's pretty simple. Bol melachim shel Eretz Yisrael likros lishmor oso. The angels of Eretz Yisrael came to Yaakov to be with him, to guard him, even though he was so far away geographically. De kevan de tzorach Eretz Yisrael hu, v'hu holech le'Eretz Yisrael. Because that's where he was headed. He was on his way towards Kedusha, to a higher level of Kedusha. Hadin nosein sheyelo shomrim malachei Eretz Yisrael. Hadin nosein literally means, it makes sense, it's logical that the angels of Eretz Yisrael should be with him miles and miles away, because that was the direction he was headed. What defined Yaakov Avinu at this moment in his life was his direction. So when someone asks you, how are you? Right? Where are you? The answer to that question is, even if I'm here presently, even if it's somewhat dark around me, if I have a clear vision and direction towards a greater madrega, more of a closeness with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's where I am right now. My direction in life defines me in the present. What's so difficult about what we're experiencing, and we continue to be bombarded with so much moral confusion, where truth becomes something that people are not only searching for, but we now become experts in denying, making up stories, working off of a bias. How in the world do we have a clear direction towards higher levels of ruchnius when we're surrounded by such sheker? And that sheker and that false narrative is not just amongst those people who are brought up, brainwashed with this hatred towards Jewish people, but even amongst many places on this wonderful planet where nations seem to be refined and dignified and civilized, we find so much sheker, so much darkness. It's interesting, we have 3 different places in the Chumash where first it was twice with Avram and then once with Yitzchak, being concerned over somebody, either Paro, Abimelech, abducting their wife, Sarah, Rivka. The second time it happens with Avram, Abimelech, when he finds out that really they're husband and wife and that Sarah is not Abraham's sister, so he presents the question as follows. He says, Ma re'isa ki asisa es hadavar hazeh. What did you see here in amongst the Plishtim that you would make up this story? And the Malbim explains his question was, look around. We're not a bunch of murderers. We don't go around killing people or abducting people against their will. We're actually a very civilized, moral society. Why would you even be afraid that if you were to be honest with us, somebody might steal your wife? Look at us. Abraham's response was, Vayomer Avraham, ki amarti rak ein yiras elokim b'makom hazeh. Because I said to myself, the one thing that's missing from this place, I'd imagine that during a Shalashuda speech, everything is so lovely here, except you're lacking yiras Hashem. But everything else is beautiful. Palm trees, right? The new building, but yiras Hashem you're lacking. Avram said to Abimelech, the one thing I picked up on was that Ein yiras elokim b'makom hazeh, and therefore v'harguni al devar ishti, you might kill me and take my wife. The Malbim explains this conversation. Avimelech again was asking, look around, we're so moral, we're so cultured. We don't kill people. Avram's response was, you would kill me in a second. I don't trust you. The Malbim says like this. Hodiya lo shegamim nira'i sho'am. We learn from this that even if you see a person or an entire nation, shehu philosoph godol, v'chakak lo nimusim yisharim. Person might be a philosopher, you might have a whole country that seems to be polite. Nimusim yisharim, they have proper ways of conduct. V'hirgul es atzman b'midos tovos, and they seem to have wonderful character traits, but it's all pi sichlo. It's based on their intellect. What seems right, what feels right. The problem with that, explains the Malbim, is that if we're doing things because it feels right, or this is trending right now, or this particular expression of social justice is something that all of my friends are into, and therefore I feel good about myself by joining this particular movement or revolution, but there's no real truth involved. There's no real yiras Hashem, there's no awareness of a Borei Olam. Oz gam sichlo yelich sholel lirtsoach velino velasos kol ra. When the winds blow, and you have a combination of factors where for some reason you might feel differently, in a heartbeat you would kill somebody, you would commit adultery, all of those things that you would have said earlier. We don't do that, we stay away from that kind of immoral conduct. You could easily justify and you could rationalize because it's not based on Yiras Hashem. This explains the Malbim is why Avram said back to Avimelech, I didn't trust you for a second, even though you all look so nice and so polite, and you enjoy classical music, and you drink red wine. I don't trust you for a second. There's no Yiras Elokim. The good news, though, is that we would never ask to be exposed to this level of insanity on all moral fronts, of a denial of truth, of a total embrace of everything that seems to be so counterintuitive. We would never have asked for this. The one benefit is that we see the impact when a society or the world around us gets to a place where it is so clear that you're just absolutely crazy. That could actually strengthen us in our own convictions. If you're not that different from us, you're doing things a little bit like this or like that, and then it could be more of a hashpa, it could be influenced, it could be swept away. But when it gets to a state, when it crosses that threshold where you have almost 300,000 Jews gathering together in Washington, the largest crowd of Jewish people probably since Maimon Har Sinai, in one place. And the way that it's referred to is tens of thousands or busloads. There is so much sheker that's so pervasive. Says Rabbi Yoshev, an amazing insight. He says, Pomim sometimes, kasher adam chai bedor shu mole chomos v'ashchasa, when a person's living in a generation where there is so much chomos and hashchasa, right, moral decay, hu choshar kama mechura hadavar, he feels how incredibly disgusting the world is around him or her, what we're okay with, what we're accepting, what we're denying. That might give you the strength that you need to be able to disconnect in a healthy way, to realize this is absolutely insane. This is not who I am, this is not what I stand for. And we've been seeing this day and night. The amount of conversations that I've had with people who have been so disconnected with Judaism, with the Jewish people. Speaking to somebody recently who grew up in a frum family, he hasn't worn tzitzis for years. It wasn't even a conversation internally. That's not what I do, that's not who I am. Now he's walking around proud with tzitzis and a yarmulke. Why? Because sometimes when you're living in a dor shu mole chomos v'ashchasa, where there's so much insanity around you, so many of the people that we looked at, so many of the countries that we looked at and we assumed friendly, moral, and we see that there can be so much pervasive sheker, that gives us a new power to have a sense of pride and strength. This is who we are, this is direction that we're headed in. So although there might be more moral confusion now than we've ever experienced, we have more of a power now than we've ever had before in having a clarity, this is our path forward. Kinar Yisrael v'ohavehu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I love you, the Jewish people, because you're a nar, because of the youth, because of the direction that you're going. To maintain a clear direction in a society of woke and moral confusion, and to only be strengthened in that conviction by realizing that without Yiras Elokim, without Torah, you could be so incredibly lost. This is a source bringing many people back, and Mitzvah Hashem, it should be a continued source of strength for us to maintain a clear direction forward. How are you doing? If I'm going in the right direction, then Baruch Hashem, I'm doing well. Good night.